Oh, Dracula love kills. Why do I despise thee so? Well, let's start with the gameplay. This is a hidden object puzzle game in the same vein as Sherlock Holmes and the Hound of the Baskervilles, with the primary difference between the two being that Sherlock is the all-around more enjoyable game. Now, sure, it's not without its difficulty spike or its challenges, but the process of getting stuck and working through it and ultimately succeeding is still fun. And with Dracula, I feel as though it starts off difficult and then just kind of hangs out there. And generally speaking, I think that a lot of the puzzle designs or concepts, kind of all the way around, just aren't really that great or that much fun. Um, Throw that into the mix with the fact that their solutions are randomly generated and that pretty much any walkthrough that my mom and I tried to follow ended up skipping about 98% of them because they were too hard, which obviously we didn't want to do, so we were left to essentially raw dog the vast majority of the game, if you will. It just was a very mentally intense and fatiguing process for us. And then there's the story. Um, of course, this is intended to serve as a sequel to the Dracula Origins game that sees him rising from his coffin after the altercation with Van Helsing, in which he gets shot with a crossbow, to find that not only has an entity known as the Vampire Queen essentially overthrown him or risen to power in his absence, but she's also kidnapped his beloved Mina Harker. So he and his loyal minion Igor must team up with his bitter rival Van Helsing to save her. And then there's some DLC where Dracula and Mina are on the hunt for this ancient magical orb that aided the queen in rising to power in the first place to rule the world together, something like that. I don't really know. Now, I have to pause for a second and dissect everything that I just said there because there is some pretty glaring continuity errors for me. The first bullet point is that the opening of the game shows you or recaps what happens at the end of the first one. Shows Dracula getting hit by the crossbow. And it depicts this scene as happening in Mina's bedroom. When in actuality, that is the room where fairly early on he turns into a bat and retreats out the window. The part where they actually have their confrontation and Dracula gets shot happens at the very end of the game in a much more open, outdoorsy, um, courtyard-esque uh, portion of his castle. So that's wrong. Secondly, um, he is seen emerging from his coffin, which is buried in or surrounded by the soil of his homeland, which is needed for regeneration and healing, which is fine. You know, that comes straight from the book. It's a fairly well known piece of Dracula lore, I would say. It's all well and good, except for the fact that last time we see him in that post-credits scene, he at least appears to be relatively unscathed. Not a scratch or a wound to be found on him. So how exactly we get from that scene to him needing to lay in his coffin for a while to regenerate, not exactly sure. But perhaps the biggest question mark of this whole thing is that one could assume with Van Helsing putting Dracula down, rescuing Mina, and essentially saving the day, that everything would be pretty hunky-dory, at least temporarily, right? But now here, Dracula and Mina are head over heels in love with each other. Reminder that he initially wasn't romantically interested in Mina herself. Rather, he wanted to use her as a vessel to house the resurrected spirit of the love from his past. But the game specifically refers to her as Mina Harker. And there is absolutely no pushback from her whatsoever. It kind of gives off this vibe of like, oh, Popeye, my hero, like this is the way it was always meant to be, or the way it always was from the very beginning, and we're just stupid kind of vibe. I don't know. Very weird. Um, and then there's Dracula as an individual character. You know, the guy that they spent all of that time really kind of crafting carefully, building him up as this very suitable, very decent psychopathic villain, just to severely neuter him here, dilute him basically to be barely anything more than an insufferable goon with the worst stereotypical Transylvanian accent you've ever heard in your life. But in the interest of trying to end this review on a positive note, I will say that for me personally, Igor is the worst thing about the entire game in the best way. And that I can appreciate their attempt at making your choices matter and carry weight in terms of who you decide to kill or don't kill, ultimately affecting the end of the game. Now, I'm not going to elaborate on either of those because, quite frankly, I don't really care all that much. I think the short and the skinny of it is that this game just wasn't for me. And I think I'm going to leave it at that. So, until next time, guys, thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves, and we will see you in the next one.